In Costa Rica, ecotourism is a big deal. In 2019, over 3 million people visited Costa Rica, largely because the country has a wonderful image as a beacon of hope in terms of sustainability, renewable energy, land protection, conservation, environmentalism in general. Is this image that Costa Rica has promoted actually something that's real? Or is it just a clever PR campaign designed to get tourists to visit here? Tonight, I want to talk about the legitimacy of Costa Rica's image as a truly green country. We're going to go quickly over green energy, their renewable energy infrastructure. We're going to talk about their reforestation efforts over the years. And really what we want to do is analyze, some of the elements of that green image that the Costa Rica government is promoting and compare them to the reality on the ground and give some thoughts to contrast that shiny public relations image with what actually happens on the ground here in Costa Rica. My name is Matt Rosensteel. I've lived here since 2008. I very much appreciate you joining me tonight. I'm live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time, or just shortly thereafter, 8 p.m. Eastern. Tonight, our topic, again, is looking at this image that Costa Rica has as a pure green country, an environmentally friendly place for people to visit. I'll give a quick news update because we just had a presidential election only a few days ago. We'll talk about, like I said, sort of looking at that green image first, and then finding both the large-scale government reasons that green image isn't necessarily true. And we'll also look at some localized, smaller community-level problems that definitely challenge that image or would contrast or really not be consistent with it. It's an exciting evening. I've upgraded my streaming software so that now we have access to amazing background music. Go ahead and cue that, Danielle. As always here on Costa Rica Matt, we're trying to improve our viewing experience to make things as fun and festive for you as possible. If you haven't done so already, if you like good information about Costa Rica that's recent, relevant, straightforward, and honest, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks again for tuning in tonight, folks. Without further ado, let's talk about Costa Rica's ecotourism green image. Stay tuned. Good evening, folks. It's February 9th, 2022. It's our Wednesday night live Costa Rica chat. My name is Costa Rica Matt Rosensteel, and I do appreciate you joining me. Before we get started on our main topic tonight, Costa Rica ecotourism and its green image, I want to give a quick update. It's only a few days since this past Sunday, Costa Rica's electorate voted for national elections here. They elected both the 57 legislative deputies and their presidential candidates. Well, if you watched the previous week's broadcast about the government here, you won't be surprised to hear whatsoever that the presidential election was inconclusive so far. Neither candidate, or none of the 7 candidates that were running, received more than 40% of the popular vote. So now there has to be a runoff between the top 2 candidates. Those top 2 candidates are Jose Maria Figueres of the PLN, or Partido Liberación Nacional, and Rodrigo Chavez Robles of the PPSD, or the Partido Progreso Social Democrático. To quickly get into a little bit of politics here, this election represented Costa Rica generally deciding to go back to an established power figure, the PLN, after just 2 terms with a further left government, the PAC. 8 years ago, Costa Ricans elected the PAC, or Partido Acción Ciudadanía. Carlos Alvarado is now president of the PAC because they were successful in winning 2 national elections. But as you frequently see here in Costa Rica, the current government quickly becomes unpopular because it's tough to keep people satisfied here in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica's voting public has now gone back to the PLN. Jose Maria Figueres, their candidate, won about 30% of the vote and was by far the most popular candidate. They're going to do a runoff because of the Constitution, and that's how things work. Nobody won 40%, so now Jose Maria and Rodrigo Chavez of a more conservative party are going to run off. Everybody expects Jose Maria Figueres to win the presidential election and the PLN to be back in power. Now remember, they have had 10 presidents since 1948. That's about 40 years of Costa Rica's history have had a PLN president, this Partido Liberación Nacional, in charge of the country because they've been very popular over the years. They've overseen a lot of economic growth. And again, they were the heroes of that 1948 civil conflict. Anyhow, that's a quick political update. My main intention tonight is to help people understand whether or not Costa Rica really comes through on this eco-friendly image that you've seen probably on the internet advertised in tourism campaigns. The country has a lot to brag about. And first, let's talk about the elements of what it is bragging about when it projects its image internationally. Well, first of all, there's the enormous biodiversity of the country. You have an area smaller than West Virginia geographically, and it has 5% of the world's species within it. It's an amazing place for that sole fact. And that's one thing that Costa Rica is absolutely not lying about. The tropics are, by nature, much more biodiverse than colder climates. And Costa Rica is very fortunate to have a huge concentration of species here so that you get everything from macaws to sloths to turtles, all kinds of interesting things here because it's a rich habitat, super biodiverse, and that's one of the things you see the Costa Rica government promoting. Second of all, you'll see them very much bragging about their renewable energy infrastructure. Steve, I love the pun that you've posted there. I really appreciate it. They have green energy here as the source of over 95% of their power. To be honest, renewable energy sources would be 100% of Costa Rica's national energy sources, except that they do have to occasionally use a backup diesel grid, essentially to make sure that it still runs, that it's available as a backup, and to keep it working. But more or less, the entire country since 2015 or a little bit earlier has been very close to 100% renewable energy, a portfolio that's made up of a lot of hydropower, geothermal, wind, solar. Really, Costa Rica brags about being at the forefront of renewable energy. And by and large, that's absolutely another true image that they're projecting. The energy sources here are 100% those renewables with that slight fossil backup. But what I want to talk about a little bit later is the flaw in that image, and that it's not necessarily all humming fish humming and people being entirely happy with the environmental results of those renewable energy resources. A third component that the Costa Rica brags about for its ecotourism, green-friendly image is definitely the fact that a huge percentage of land here is protected as one or more forms of parkland. They are very frequently citing the fact that over a quarter of Costa Rica is protected. And in fact, the number is about 28%. 12% of that is in national parks. 16% is land that falls into a different category. And a bit later, we'll also talk about why that doesn't necessarily mean that things stay 100% pristine. Fourth, let's go on to another element that they'll brag about, which is Costa Rica's massive reforestation efforts. You will, for example, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I arrived in 2008, we had officials come and give us a presentation very much focusing on the fact that at 1987, deforestation in Costa Rica peaked. You saw the country at its barest point in recent history. From 1987 until now, you've actually seen forest cover recovering in Costa Rica, which is absolutely miraculous in a dying planet where you see the opposite in almost every other country on Earth. Again, that's not 100% perfect from what you might understand as a foreigner, and we'll cover a little bit of a flaw with the reforestation that's happened here over the last 40 years. Finally, Costa Rica would also be very much promoting their carbon neutrality efforts. The government made it very public that they intend to be one of the first countries on Earth to be carbon neutral. They put this in a very public set of statements of, 5 or 10 years ago. And it's one of the things that you saw Costa Rica publicizing very much to foreigners as an innovative thing that the country is doing and a reason you should move here. Again, things have not going entirely to plan. What I want to talk about first are some of the macro reasons, the large scale, the government policy reasons that this green image isn't necessarily perfect. And to start at the national government level, let's go back, first of all, to that green energy infrastructure, 100% renewable resources, etc. It's important to understand that these assets that Costa Rica has developed, there are several huge dams in the country that provide a huge amount of electricity. There are other solar projects, huge wind installations, all kinds of stuff. I've got Art and Jan walking past my office. Welcome back to Hunkial. These projects have not come without costs. And many times, the Costa Rica's national government has put the interests, eminent domain and their drive for renewable energy above the interests of local communities. To cite one very clear example, when the Costa Rica government set up the Arenal Dam, which now is incredibly important to the energy infrastructure in the country, they had to move an entire small town of people who lived in the river valley where they needed to set up that dam. And that's just one of a million consequences that have come attached to renewable energy projects. It's never been 100% amenable to the people where these assets were being installed. And a lot of times the installation of energy generating assets, whether they are geothermal, wind, solar, etc., has been put over the interests of the local community, or sort of quieting the local community's voice in the interest of pursuing this green energy dream. To look at another, government national flaw with this ecotourism perfect green image that Costa Rica has is that, surprise, surprise, Costa Rica's government is very much or rather, the officials in Costa Rica's government are vulnerable to influence by major interests, economic, social, etc., just like any other politicians on earth. And you do see frequently that national government, legislative members, the presidency, the entire government does bow to the economic interests that a lot of times want to ruin natural resources or exploit them to their utmost, in direct contrast to this image that Costa Rica is trying to promote. For example, one of the things that would come to mind in our area, in Guanacaste, we have a massive river basin, the Tempisque River Basin. Thousands and thousands of acres of the floodplain of this river basin have been dedicated to irrigated sugarcane and a range of other fruits and different agricultural enterprises that extract a massive amount of water out of this basin every year. I saw a chart once where the agricultural interests, the sugarcane producers, are sucking out far more water per year than the greater area, the communities, the people living there themselves actually do. And that's because Guanacaste is not necessarily the greatest place on earth to grow sugar. It's extremely dry here. You do have to supply an enormous amount of water. And to make it work, these massive sugarcane producers burn their fields to prepare them for harvesting. Let me repeat that. The sugarcane producers in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, with this perfect environmental image, burn thousands of acres every single year in order to prepare the sugarcane for harvest. I've read that it's not 100% necessary to do this. I don't actually know because I haven't worked in the industry, but this is something that is supported by the Costa Rica government. And here, this sugar interest, one of the major agricultural interests in the country, they get their water concessions approved. They get their farms protected. That industry will never be booted out of Guanacaste, despite the fact that monoculture sugar plantations might be about the most unecological thing on earth, especially, again, when you are burning everything every single year. If you can tell, I'm a little bit angry because that burning is really just a pain in everybody's behind out here. But that's one crystal clear example where I can think of the Costa Rican government abiding by something that is definitely not ecologically sound because there are huge economic interests behind it. Let's go on to the fact that a large percentage of Costa Rica's land is protected via one or a number of different programs here. And yes, it's wonderful that 28% of Costa Rica's national land is in one protection status or another. That's absolutely terrific. And I think that percentage is higher than most countries on earth. First of all, let's look at the fact that protecting land isn't necessarily the only step to making sure that it regenerates and that it's properly conserved. In fact, in Costa Rica, when I talk about multiple conservation statuses, there's that 12% of the protected land that is national park, where if they catch anybody cutting down a tree or shooting an animal or doing anything unecological, the government is going to come down very hard in that 12% of the national land. That other 16% is a wide variety of protection statuses. And some of it, this includes indigenous reserves, biological corridors, and a lot of different protection statuses that when you're on the ground here in Costa Rica, you learn aren't necessarily that high level of protection than a national park has. Yes, they might have this land roped off as protected estuary or green space. Sorry, I've got a light flickering on and off. My apologies. But many times the conservation status of that land might be symbolic at best, where the protection is a sign that says, please don't burn, don't do anything that's prohibited on this land. It is protected. They have no rangers. They have no real control over what's happening in the little corners of the parcel, and it becomes very imperfect. Yes, I think that Costa Ricans in general are not gnawing away at the edges of parks, and you don't see flagrant violations and people immediately trying to take advantage of the system. But you do see that 28% of a national territory being protected in many cases doesn't mean very much. It's really just that, yes, the land has a certain conservation status. It's designated for this use and will not be developed. And beyond that, there isn't much actual conservation happening. Beyond that, let's go on to reforestation. When the Costa Rica government says, well, if you look at our history in the 1940s, 75% of the country was covered, in lush forest. Yes, from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, we deforested. And in fact, in 1987, almost half of that forest cover had been eliminated. Estimates range between a third and a half. But in those decades, Costa Rica was one of the most quickly deforested countries on earth. People came through looking for their precious hardwoods that they had: mahogany, Spanish cedar, rosewood, and others. I need to turn off that light before I keep looking at it. Take a break and I'll be back in 10 seconds. The deforestation absolutely peaked in 1987, and since then, the Costa Rica government is very proud of the fact that they've recuperated back to a level of forest cover that's around 60%. So you had 75 in the 40s. It dropped to maybe 35 to 50% in 1987, and then came back up to 60% as of today. And that's a very amazing thing for Costa Rica to brag about. Unfortunately, one of the major programs that they did to accomplish this change was not anything that resembles reforestation in an ecological sense. They were not necessarily taking cattle pastures and recuperating them with a mix of native species and a biodiverse forest. In fact, a huge number of acres that were planted as part of this massive reforestation effort are monoculture wood plantations. You saw the Costa Rican government take international carbon sequestration money, sort of money that was designated to get forests regrown, and a huge amount of funding helped farmers in Guanacaste and throughout the country plant reforestation projects that are either teak, Honduran pine, or another one called pachote. There are other lumber species. But from an ecological perspective, while yes, it's nicer to have trees on a field than just to have cows, to be honest, the trees really don't do anything for the local ecosystem, especially if they're teak trees, which are native to India and not to Costa Rica. And especially when you plant one single kind of tree over huge volumes of acres, as the Costa Rica government promoted, you see that really these lumber plantations are more, they're only apt for producing wood. They are not at all helping local insect species and amphibians, reptiles. They're not helping the ecosystem recuperate whatsoever. And I think it was, a lot of people also get starry-eyed about the fact that Costa Rica has been wonderfully reforested. Please do take the grain of salt that a large percentage of that was monoculture plantations that really were an economic program designed to help people start to diversify their income, and also for Costa Rica to start some of its ecological programs. One that's important that I want to mention, and especially in terms of reforestation, in 1996, Costa Rica did make it illegal to cut down forest in its natural form. You could, continue to keep forest cleared where it was already cleared, but they made it illegal to clear new forest. That alone was an enormous step, and really, if I'm seeming negative and, citing the drawbacks of certain things about Costa Rica, that's an amazing thing. It is by default illegal to cut down forest here. So they've immediately put any economic interest on their back foot in that, yes, they have to prove a real reason to change land use. In 1997, the year after they'd made it illegal to cut down forest, they established their Payments for Ecological Services program, which is a huge component of this overall picture. They were able to drive a lot of reforestation efforts and fund it through these payments programs. It's called PES. In Spanish, it would be Pagos por Servicios Ambientales, or PSA. But the general idea is that the government pays you to either reforest land, to help native species regenerate. They would fund protecting wetlands. They would fund all kinds of things that were quantifiable ecological services, and give money to farmers in order to be able to, fund the costs of reforestation or protection, etc. These PES programs are wonderful, and I don't want to be negative about them either. But a lot of times what you would see is that the Costa Rica government was only able to generate this kind of contract, paying someone for reforestation, when that farmer had hundreds of acres. It was pretty difficult for these programs to reach the smaller landowners, and the economics of it didn't necessarily make sense. In our areas, I know and work with a lot of farmers who have 30 to 50 acres, and they need every square inch of their land for their cows, to get a bit of grass. They don't have a large enough acreage to sacrifice for a reforestation program that the Costa Rica government might pay it, $500 per acre per year. So you did see a lot of this money go to larger landowners, higher, people in the economic higher strata here in Costa Rica, and the people with 2,000 or 5,000 acres who could say, yeah, I'm going to plant 1,000 acres of teak. They would get the government PES, Payment for Ecological Services, in order to fund their reforestation. And then that reforestation, not only was it counted as part of Costa Rica's recuperating forest cover, but that person would be allowed to completely clear cut it, or to take out wood at a sustainable pace further down the road once their contract had expired. So again, when Costa Rica is talking about their huge advances in reforestation, it's not necessarily perfect, and you have seen a ton of it done under the umbrella of these PES programs, or what are largely paying people and rich people to reforest, plant trees, most often to eventually be harvested for lumber. One final, in looking at large flaws with Costa Rica's green imagery and what they're trying to promote, I wanted to pull up just quickly one of Costa Rica's goals. I found this article from Northeastern University talking about Costa Rica's goal to be carbon neutral by 2021. And yes, the country had this goal They were very public when they initially came out with their objective. This is still very much at the forefront, and Costa Rica is a country that wants to be one of the first ever carbon neutral countries on the planet. But let's be frank, people, it's 2022, and Costa Rica is nowhere near it. Yes, we have all of our energy generated from renewable sources. That's terrific. If you've ever thought about what it takes to actually run a dam, imagine 200 people, the employees of that dam driving there in their own cars, 99% of which are still fossil fuel driven here in the country. Our distribution networks are still based on fossil fuels. Construction is still based on fossil fuels, on and on and on. This is not a carbon neutral country. It did not achieve the 2021 mark. It's wonderful that they're promoting this ideal internationally, and I absolutely would love to see it happen as soon as possible. As a realist, I think that it will be decades, if not forever, before the country actually achieves it. Finally, one thing I want to mention is at the national government level, they do promote their green image, and then the government here will occasionally give away large tracts of land to economic interests. If anybody out there is surprised by that, a government giving away its national resources to special economic interests, then you've been on the wrong channel for a long time. But here in Costa Rica, the government's not immune from that. I'm not going to name specific locations and projects that have happened in the country, but you've seen very much the government collaborating with developers to create huge tourism assets along our coastline, and very much trying to take advantage of creating their own tax base, having an economic interest in that tourism development, and sacrificing natural resources for profit. It happens here just like everywhere else on Earth. A couple years ago, there was a massive brawl because the president and Costa Rica's government had approved trawling off our coast, or really, aggressive seafloor harvesting of shrimp and other stuff by China. And that drew a huge backlash from the Costa Rican, national community, foreigners. Everybody was upset because trawling is about as environmentally bad as it gets. You kill 50 organisms for every one that you're actually going to put in somebody's pasta later that night. And so there was this massive uproar. And to their credit, the Costa Rica government did walk back on it. But it took some pretty massive civilian efforts, and it also took politicians realizing that they were going to be unpopular if they let the trawling continue to really make any change. You had months where we thought we were going to have trawlers off our coast unrestricted because of this legislation that was entirely driven by economic interests. Not only at the national big government level are there issues with Costa Rica's ecotourism, pura vida image, but you do see some things at the local level. And if you're an expat interested in moving here, or if you're a person interested in becoming an expat by moving here, what I want to say is that do not be disillusioned by the fact that at the community level, you're going to see a number of practices that do not jive whatsoever with your hope and your fantasy of Costa Rica being this pristine, idyllic environment. You will see, first of all, that garbage collection programs are being very slowly implemented. And in a lot of places, people are still burning their garbage in rural areas. A lot of rural people, sort of outside of areas where there's a lot of garbage, are still casually dropping stuff in the river. And you don't see that there's that passion for making sure that every single item of garbage makes its way into the garbage can. And for a lot of foreigners, you might show up in my little town here, Paraíso, and see some of the disgusting stuff on the curb and think, oh, I really hoped Costa Rica was better. I know that it's better than this. Remember, Costa Rica is made up of a lot of individuals, and many of those are from a previous generation. That previous generation, so I've talked to people who are coming to Costa Rica 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and everybody remarks just how much better the garbage problem has got since they began coming here. 30 years ago, when they would be traveling through Costa Rica, it would look like every other Central American country with garbage everywhere. Gutters in many of the roads would just have bottle after bottle after bottle and really just be a conduit for trash. Today, in 2022, these people that you see throwing stuff carelessly in the river, the people that you see burning garbage out of necessity, this is becoming the exception to the rule, and there is enormous improvement happening. I saw a huge change even in the couple years I was here as a Peace Corps volunteer. And really then going forward, when I started working with our watershed organization, we had to publish all kinds of information about the fact that the new garbage service would not mean that people would have extra taxes if they put 2 bags instead of 1, etc. We had to really explain the system. You leave all your garbage. There were still tons of people at that time, 2011, 12, 13, 14, who would refuse to use the municipal system. And today I'm thrilled to say that, on Fridays when the garbage truck comes through our area, you see 99% of people have their garbage out at the curb, adequately packed up in nice bags right before the truck comes. And to think that 11 years ago, things were so different, I'm really glad. And I feel that it's one area where, Costa Rica is not perfect, but it's doing a darn good job in arriving at the culture of real, garbage management. Again, it's not perfect. You will see garbage in a lot of places. There will be issues along the way, but it's moving in the right direction. And that's something that really is encouraging to me. You also see in our area, especially of Guanacaste, that a lot of people still use fire to clear their land. And starting brush fires can be one of the most difficult things for a foreigner to understand or begin to wrap their head around or even adapt to living with. Just last night, if you look at my thumbnail, I put a picture on there from a fire in Guanacaste 4 years ago. Last night, the volunteer fire brigade in our area was rounding up volunteers desperately to go put out a fire in a teak field where a guy was clearing brush out. And what you have to understand is, first of all, this land practice, as stupid as it is, as short-sighted, as really unenvironmentally friendly as it is the easiest way for anybody who owns a large quantity of land to make it accessible to themselves. You might have seen an episode where I talked about trees in Costa Rica. Stuff grows here super fast, unbelievably fast. Farmers, if they don't clear out their land annually, will be dealing with scrubby, thorny brush the next year. They have to either go through manually with machetes and chop out everything, or they would have to create some ideal permaculture system where grasses are shaded out in some enormously difficult project. And that's just not the reality of Guanacaste. This is a cattle ranching economy that's transitioning into a more diverse economy. People do not have money to invest a huge amount in maintaining their fields without that sort of practice. And a lot of times for them to be able to get through their farm the next year, during our dry season, it's easiest just to light their fields on fire and get it going so that next year or when the rains come, all of the brush is cleared out and they can walk through the forest. That may seem like something that's kind of barbaric or, doesn't jive with Costa Rica's green image. Lots of indigenous cultures were very big fans of using fire for the exact same purpose. Forest is awful, can be very difficult to walk through. Fire is a useful tool, and you'll get people burning in Guanacaste. Again, this is another area where I'm wonderfully proud and happy with the way things are moving. Yes, we will still get fires every year in different areas. You see them outside of Flamingo. The hills behind Potrero have farmers who like to burn. You have this amazing contrast between luxury condos and ocean views and yachts and a marina, and then, old farmers who still just clear their land with fire. But it's, again, becoming the exception to the rule, and really a practice that's being addressed thoroughly by the current culture. You see massive national anti-fire campaigns every year, really just sort of the propaganda, like for cornflakes or whatever, or the bear that said don't burn. That same thing. Here it's a raccoon that I can't think of his name. A national raccoon promoting the image of not burning. They've been investing huge amounts of tax dollars in setting up fire brigades in every city. And finally, you see local communities in Guanacaste organizing their volunteer fire brigades. Last night, when this teak field was on fire, I was absolutely incredulous to see over a dozen people from the local community. They were out there coordinating with radios, working with the professional firefighters, and it's clear that the culture here is becoming anti-fire. 14 years ago, when I first came here, everywhere would burn every single year, and there was not a single person in many areas who gave a single hoot about it. Today, you see people working until 11:30, 12:30 at night on some of these fires, trying to stop it because they're passionate about the conserving. And like I said, the culture is changing in a very positive way. Smokey the Bear, Claude, thank you very much. One cultural reference I should have had, but just didn't right there. Appreciate that. Here they have not Smokey the Bear, but Smokey the Raccoon or something like that. And those are two of the absolute biggest issues that I see Costa Ricans not necessarily at the local level fulfilling their environmental, nationally broadcast PR image. And like I said, when expats arrive in Costa Rica, they think, oh, well, why would people do this? On and on, they sort of are incredulous. You have to understand there are always reasons that people would decide to throw their own trash in a creek by their house or to burn it in their yard and deal with the smoke themselves. Those reasons in many cases are literally that there wasn't trash service in these rural areas in Costa Rica until very recently. So in many, many ways, you've got the culture coming up to and slowly fulfilling what Costa Rica's national government promotes as its Esencial Costa Rica image, this idyllic, pristine place where everybody is 100% in jive with their ecosystem. Do not worry. Before I go, we will have a moment of absolute pure beach zen with my kids boogie boarding as the sun sets behind them. Before I sign off, as always, I want to thank people for joining me. I'm here live on Wednesday nights providing relevant information for anybody considering moving to Costa Rica or investing here. If you've decided that the area around Tamarindo is right for you and you're starting to look at real estate, please do reach out so we can talk about the available options. Without further ado, before we head out, I want to send you off with our beautiful, idyllic Costa Rica sunset here. Tonight, our topic was ecotourism and Costa Rica's green image. Thanks for joining. Enjoy.